The Perseverance drifted silently through the inky vastness of space, its hull gleaming against the backdrop of 1,000 stars. Inside, the hum of the ship's engines was the only sound, a quiet reminder of the distance between Earth and the unknown reaches of the galaxy. Captain Aidan Lawson stood on the command deck, staring out through the viewports. His mind wasn't on the beauty of the stars. It was on the dark patch of space ahead. An anomaly that had been bothering him for days. A strange signal, weak but insistent, had been repeating for over a week, originating from a location on the fringe of the Coalition's territory. It was a distress signal, one that seemed to carry more than just a warning. It carried something else, a sense of urgency, something wrong. "Captain, we're approaching the source of the signal." Lieutenant Mara Kane's voice interrupted his thoughts. She was at the helm, her fingers dancing across the console as she maneuvered the ship with practiced precision. "Any idea what's causing it?" Lawson asked, his tone serious. Kane shook her head, her dark hair barely moving. "It's faint, too scattered to pinpoint exactly. But it's a human transmission. It's been encrypted, but we've cracked the code. It's from Outpost Elysium 9. Elysium 9. Lawson's stomach twisted. It was an important research station, one of the Coalition's farthest outposts. The fact that it had gone silent was disturbing enough, but the distress signal suggested something far worse. The Perseverance was the only ship in range, and with the Coalition distracted by internal political turmoil, it fell to them to investigate. "We'll go in quietly," Lawson ordered. "Prepare for standard recon. No weapons unless we're fired upon." Kane nodded, and the ship adjusted its course, cutting through the stars. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, the distance between them and the outpost growing ever shorter. But as they neared the coordinates, something didn't feel right. The usual traffic from the station was absent, and the surrounding space seemed too still, too empty. "Lieutenant, slow us down," Lawson ordered, his instincts kicking in. "Something's off." Kane complied, her fingers moving over the controls with swift determination. The ship slowed, moving cautiously toward the outpost. As they came into visual range, the first thing that struck them was the absence of the station's usual energy signature. Elysium 9 should have been emitting a constant hum of activity, a beacon for the entire region. But now, it was silent, void of life. Detecting minimal power readings, Kane reported, her voice low with concern. "There's something wrong, Captain. The station's core is barely active, and I'm not detecting any life signs." Lawson's brow furrowed. His instincts screamed danger. He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but something was clearly wrong. The Perseverance was alone in this corner of the galaxy, with no backup. If something had gone wrong here, they could be walking into a trap. "We're going in," Lawson said, decisively. "Prepare to board. Bring up the suits. Stay alert." The crew readied themselves, their movements swift and efficient. They knew the risks. Every part of the universe beyond Earth's borders was dangerous, unpredictable. But this felt different. As they approached the docking bay of Elysium 9, the shadows deepened, swallowing up the distant stars. Something shifted in the air, an unnatural coldness that seemed to cling to the edges of the ship. Lawson felt a sudden tightening in his chest, a strange, gnawing sensation at the back of his mind. He was about to lead his crew into the unknown, where whatever had happened to Elysium 9 could be far worse than they'd anticipated. Then the signal changed. It wasn't a distress call anymore. It was a message, a warning. They are coming. The docking bay of Elysium 9 creaked as the Perseverance locked onto the station's barren port. The sound was eerily familiar, but now it felt wrong, like the last breath of something long forgotten. Captain Lawson stood before the airlock, the faintest tension running through his muscles. The mission had already taken a dark turn, but the warning on the signal, "They are coming," had been unsettling. It wasn't just a cryptic message. It was a threat. He turned to Lieutenant Mara Kane, who stood beside him, her face pale under the harsh glow of the docking bay lights. She wasn't one to show fear, but even she couldn't mask the unease that had settled in her posture. "Get the boarding party ready. I'll lead the first team," Lawson ordered. His voice was firm, but even he could feel the weight of what they might be walking into. The rest of the crew stood ready in the background, faces hidden behind the faceplates of their suits, every one of them holding their breath. They all knew that whatever awaited them on Elysium Mine wasn't something the Perseverance could easily handle. The airlock doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the team stepped out into the ghostly silence of the station. It was as if the entire facility had been abandoned in the blink of an eye. The lights flickered dimly overhead, casting long, distorted shadows across the metal floors. Every room they passed was eerily quiet, with no sign of life. No human personnel, no artificial assistance, just the hollow hum of the station's failing systems. "It doesn't make sense," Kane muttered, her voice crackling through their comms. This station was a major research outpost. Why would they just abandon it? Lawson glanced over at her, his jaw tight. He didn't have an answer for her. He didn't even have an explanation for the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach. But as they continued deeper into the station's core, they began to find signs of violence: smashed consoles, overturned equipment, and most disturbingly, bloodstains on the walls. "Keep your guard up," Lawson ordered, his voice low but commanding. "There's no telling what happened here." They reached the central command room, its large viewing windows overlooking the vast expanse of space. But it wasn't the stars that held Lawson's gaze. It was the body. The body of a man slumped in a chair, the remains of his lifeless form covered in an unnatural blackened burn, as if something had seared through his flesh with terrifying precision. Kane moved forward, her boots echoing in the silent room. "Captain, this doesn't look like an accident. These burns, they're not from a weapon I've ever seen." Lawson studied the body, a cold feeling creeping over him. The burn marks weren't conventional. They weren't from energy weapons or explosions. They were something more insidious, something that resonated with the same unnatural feeling he'd gotten when they first received the distress signal. Then, a low sound broke the silence, a soft, rhythmic pulse, barely audible. Lawson turned toward the far side of the room where a console flickered to life, its screen showing static-filled images of the distant stars. But one of the images caught his eye. A distorted shape was forming in the far reaches of the galaxy, a vast darkness moving through space, a mass of swirling energy unlike anything they had ever seen. It was headed straight for them. "That's them," Kane whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. "That's the force behind the signal. The shard." Lawson felt the air grow colder as the realization hit him. Whatever had been set in motion centuries ago had finally come to pass. The shard, the ancient force that had been sealed away by the Coalition, were waking up, and their power was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. He turned to Kane, his eyes steely with resolve. "Get the Perseverance on high alert. We need to leave now." But as the team began to retreat toward the airlock, a sudden burst of static filled their comms, followed by a voice, thin, metallic, and unearthly. "It is too late for you, Captain. You have already been marked." A chill ran down Lawson's spine as the voice echoed through the station's darkened halls. The door to the airlock hissed open, but as they stepped through, the way back to the ship was blocked. Something was already here. They weren't alone anymore. The shard were coming. The crew of the Perseverance barely made it back to the docking bay before the first tremors shook the station. The once steady hum of the airlock had been replaced by a low, vibrating resonance that seemed to reverberate through the very walls. Captain Lawson, now leading his crew at a brisk pace, knew something was wrong. Wrong in a way he had never felt before. There was no visible enemy, no ships closing in on them. Yet the air felt heavier, charged with an unfamiliar energy. "Something's moving through the station," Kane said, her voice strained over the comms as she kept her eyes peeled behind them. "But I can't pinpoint it. It's like It's everywhere. Lawson's hand instinctively went to the sidearm at his hip, but he knew weapons would do little against an enemy they couldn't even see. He had seen the signs, the distorted visuals on the console, the unnatural burn marks on the body in the command room. It was all pointing to one thing: the shard. "Keep moving," Lawson ordered, his voice a low growl of determination. "We get back to the Perseverance, and we leave. No more delays. We don't have time to." Before he could finish, a ripple of energy coursed through the floor, making his vision blur and his breath catch. The lights flickered violently, and the very walls of the station seemed to pulse in rhythm with the pulse in the air. Kane stumbled, catching herself against the nearest wall. "Captain." Kane's voice cut through the chaos. She looked back toward the open doorway they had just exited, but the hallway behind them wasn't empty anymore. A figure stood there, its silhouette distorted by the flickering light. But it wasn't just one figure. It was a shifting form, like a person composed of smoke and shadow, its features rippling like a liquid in slow motion. A cold voice echoed in the air, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "You have awakened us," the voice intoned, deep and hollow. "The bond has been broken. The shard will return." A chill ran down Lawson's spine, his grip tightening on his weapon. The figure didn't move, yet its presence was overwhelming. It was no ordinary being. It was a shard, or, more accurately, it was a projection, an extension of the shard's collective consciousness. This entity was not bound by the laws of time and space. Lawson took a step back, rallying his team. "Prepare yourselves," he barked, though he wasn't sure what good it would do. Nothing about this was ordinary. The shard were not just an enemy fleet. They were a force of nature, and they could manipulate reality itself. The entity tilted its head slightly, as though regarding them with some form of curiosity. "You do not understand, Captain," it continued, its voice no longer echoing in the room, but seemingly emanating from within their own minds. "We are the beginning and the end. We are the unbroken chain that once tied all to the stars. And now, you will be the key to our resurrection." The air seemed to thicken, the temperature dropping so rapidly that Lawson's breath fogged before him. His hand shot out, grabbing Kane by the arm. "Now," he shouted, "get to the Perseverance. I'll cover you." But as they moved, another ripple of energy hit them. The floor buckled beneath their feet, throwing them off balance. Kane cursed as she struggled to keep her footing, but it was the least of their problems. From the ceiling, another form descended, its body a mass of energy and shadow, its arms extending toward them with unnatural fluidity. It was another shard projection, more powerful than the first. "We cannot allow you to leave." The second figure spoke, its voice like 1,000 whispers tangled together. It stretched its arm toward Lawson, and he felt his body seize, as if invisible chains were wrapping around him. His mind spun, a headache blooming at the base of his skull. He had never felt power like this before, raw, unbridled, and ancient. But somehow he resisted. The force tugged, yanked, but it couldn't fully control him. "Captain," Kane cried, pulling him back as she opened fire on the descending figure. Her blaster's energy bolts barely seemed to phase it, passing through the shard projection like it was smoke. "No," Lawson shouted, his voice hoarse. "We can't fight them here. They control the space itself." The entity's form rippled, a distorted smile forming in the darkness. "You are not the first to attempt escape, Captain. Nor will you be the last." The words rang out like an omen. With a last-ditch effort, Lawson pushed forward, breaking free of the hold the shard had on him. He grabbed Kane by the arm, pulling her toward the station's airlock. But just as they reached the threshold, the walls warped again, reality itself contorting as a final, paralyzing wave of energy blasted through the station. The shard weren't just attacking. They were reshaping the very world around them. They weren't just going to take Elysium 9. They were going to take everything. And they weren't going to stop. The Perseverance was not built for speed. It was a warship, robust, heavily armored, and designed to outlast prolonged battles. But in its current state, limping away from Elysium 9, it felt sluggish and vulnerable. The crew had barely managed to break free from the station's gravitational pull, and already the Perseverance was under siege. Every passing moment brought the shard's influence closer to them, the twisted energy distorting reality itself. The stars outside twisted in impossible spirals, their light bending and refracting like the shattered glass of a forgotten mirror. Captain Lawson stood on the command deck, his eyes fixed on the holo display that flickered erratically before him. Kane was at the helm, her face set in a grim line, as she fought to maintain control of the ship's course. The rest of the crew was either on high alert or preparing for the inevitable, an assault they knew was coming but couldn't predict. "They're following us," Kane muttered, glancing at the sensors. "I don't know how, but we're not outrunning them. They're warping space itself, Captain. We're out of time." Lawson's jaw tightened. He could feel it too. The presence of the shard, pressing against them, pushing the limits of the ship. It wasn't just a physical chase. The very fabric of the universe was being torn at the edges, unraveling like an old tapestry. They were fighting against an enemy that didn't just control space. It twisted it, reshaped it, and in the process, it made everything they knew feel small, fragile. "We need a weapon, something that can disrupt their hold on this space," Lawson said, turning toward the ship's science officer, Dr. Emily Strauss, who had been monitoring the strange phenomenon on the station. Strauss looked up from her console, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We might have something," she said slowly, almost as if she were speaking more to herself than to the crew. "Before we left Earth, the military commissioned a project, something to counteract a potential reality warping threat. It's experimental. We never thought we'd need it." Lawson's eyes narrowed. "What kind of weapon?" Strauss hesitated. "It's not exactly a weapon. It's an AI, one designed to interface with and disrupt the shard's energy fields. But we don't have a full understanding of how it works or what the consequences might be. We've only run simulations." "Can it work?" Lawson interrupted, urgency in his voice. "Because if we don't try something now, we're dead." Strauss met his gaze, her face pale. "I think so. But we'll need to install it into the ship's core. The integration will take time, and we might lose control of the ship while it's processing. It could turn everything against us." "Do it," Lawson ordered, his voice decisive. "We don't have a choice. Prepare for a bumpy ride." The crew scrambled into action, the tension palpable in the air. Strauss and her team moved quickly to bring the AI online, working against the clock. Lawson stood at the helm with Kane, watching the distortion on the horizon grow closer. The shard were nearly upon them. He could feel their presence suffocating the space around them. "They're almost here," Kane said, her voice tight. "Captain, we need tow." Before she could finish, a jarring shudder ran through the Perseverance. A burst of static filled their comms, followed by a voice, not from their ship, but from the vast, alien void outside. It wasn't the shard's leader, not one of the projections they had encountered before. This voice was something else, something even more ominous. "You think you can escape. You think your technology can defy us. We are the shard, and you will serve us." The voice crackled with an unsettling finality, and Lawson felt the ship lurch violently to the side. The floor buckled beneath their feet, and a deep, resonating pulse rippled through the ship. Reality seemed to fold in on itself as the Perseverance was flung sideways, caught in the gravitational pull of an unseen force. The stars outside twisted again, drawing closer as though they were being sucked into an invisible vortex. "Brace for impact," Lawson shouted, grabbing the nearest console to steady himself as the ship spun out of control. The crew scrambled to hold onto anything solid as the ship's systems overloaded, flashing red warnings across every viewport. Strauss' voice broke through the chaos. "AI integration is 70% complete, Captain. We're almost there." "Not fast enough." Lawson growled, his knuckles white against the console. We can't let them get any closer. Kane's hands flew over the controls, struggling to maintain some semblance of control. But the shard's influence was overwhelming, and the Perseverance was shaking, losing its cohesion under the strain. They were entering an unstable region of space, a place where the shard's power was at its peak. Then, just as it seemed the ship would be torn apart, Strauss' voice rang through the comms again, shaky but filled with hope. It's online. The AI's online, Captain. A sudden burst of energy shot through the ship's systems. The lights flickered as the AI took control, interfacing directly with the Perseverance core. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a new pulse of energy, sharp, bright, and cold, rippled outward from the ship. The AI had synchronized with the ship's systems, creating a protective field, a barrier that pushed back against the shard's influence. Lawson felt a surge of relief, but it was fleeting. The shard were still out there, and they were just beginning to show their full strength. We've bought ourselves some time, Lawson muttered under his breath. But he knew better than to think that time would last forever. The real battle had only just begun. The sudden surge of energy that had stabilized the Perseverance was like a brief reprieve in the eye of a storm. The protective barrier created by the AI shimmered around the ship, its faint glow pulsing with each incoming wave of distortion from the shard. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was in the face of an ancient reality-warping force like the shard, but it was enough to slow their progress. For now. Captain, we've got a problem. Kane's voice crackled over the comms, her tone urgent. The barrier's holding, but the shard are adapting. They're shifting the energy patterns around us. I don't think we can keep this up much longer. Lawson's grip tightened on the console. The stars outside were beginning to warp again, twisting into unnatural shapes as the shard pushed against the Perseverance field. He could feel the pull of the energy, the overwhelming force trying to break through the AI's defense. It was a battle of wills. Human technology versus an incomprehensible, ancient power. How long until the AI can adjust the field? Lawson demanded, his voice sharp. Strauss, hunched over her console, worked furiously to calibrate the AI settings. At this rate, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before the shard force us into another collapse. The AI is making small adjustments, but it's not enough to withstand their full strength. We need a permanent solution. Permanent solution. Kane scoffed from the helm. We're fighting against an enemy that bends reality to its will. There is no permanent solution. We're outmatched. I'm not willing to accept that. Lawson snapped. He could feel the pressure mounting. The shard were pushing harder now, their presence tangible in the air around him. I won't let them win. He looked over at Strauss, who was still furiously typing commands into the system. Is there any way we can use their power against them? Something that would break their hold? Strauss looked up, her expression tense. I might have a theory. If we can link the AI to the core of the shard's energy source, whatever that is, we could disrupt their entire network. But it's risky. We would have to be within close proximity to their main force, and that's where it gets complicated. Lawson didn't hesitate. Then we go to them. Kane shot him a look of disbelief. Are you out of your mind? We're barely holding it together here. You want us to fly straight into their heart. That's suicide. We have no other option, Lawson said grimly. If we wait here, they'll tear the ship apart, and we'll be left with nothing. If we can hit their core, maybe we can destroy their control over this region of space. The tension was thick in the air, but the crew had no choice. They all knew it. The Perseverance was humanity's last line of defense, and if they didn't strike back now, there would be nothing left to fight for. Fine, Kane said, her voice low but steady. I'll make the jump. But I'm telling you, Captain, we're going to need a miracle. Lawson didn't answer. He wasn't in the business of waiting for miracles. He was in the business of making them happen. The ship lurched as Kane punched in the coordinates, locking their course toward the center of the shard's energy field. The stars outside seemed to stretch and twist as the Perseverance shot forward, the protective barrier flickering under the strain. The Shard were already reacting, sending ripples through the fabric of space itself, trying to redirect them. But they were too late. As the ship hurtled toward the heart of the Shard's domain, the AI's energy pulses grew stronger, crackling in the air like static electricity. Lawson could feel it deep in his chest, a pressure that threatened to collapse him in on himself. The Shard were close, so close he could almost hear them. Their whispers, their thoughts, all bleeding into his mind. "You will fail." The voice echoed through his skull, alien and ancient. But Lawson refused to flinch. "We're close," Strauss said. "Just a little longer. I'm rerouting the AI to engage with their core. We can't stop it now." The Shard were closing in on them, a wave of dark energy racing toward them like a storm. The ship's shields were beginning to flicker, the strain of the energy warping the very metal of the Perseverance. But Lawson stood firm, gripping the console as the countdown to the core's center continued. Then, in an instant, the ship was inside. A violent surge of energy filled the entire bridge, and everything went dark. The stars outside disappeared into a swirling black void. The Perseverance was now at the epicenter of the Shard's domain. The walls of the ship groaned under the pressure, and Lawson could feel the very fabric of reality bending around him. "This is it," Kane said quietly, as the ship shuddered violently. A single thought burned through Lawson's mind. They may have controlled this space for millennia, but they will not control humanity. And then, the AI initiated the final phase. The entire ship's core ignited with a blinding flash of light. The blinding flash of light enveloped the Perseverance as the AI's final phase initiated, its power surging through the ship's core. For a split second, everything went still, utterly, unnervingly still. The violent pulsing of the Shard's energy field seemed to freeze in place, like a heartbeat that had momentarily stopped. Then, with a deafening roar, the ship was shaken to its very foundations. The Perseverance buckled under the strain as the energy began to cascade through its systems. Lawson gripped the console, his knuckles white, as the force reverberated through every bulkhead. Outside the viewports, the void stretched and warped like the universe itself was being torn apart. "We've hit the core," Strauss shouted over the roar of the storm. The AI's integrated fully into the Shard's energy matrix, but it's destabilizing everything. The Shard won't be able to maintain their hold much longer. But the sound of Strauss's voice was drowned out by another wave of distortion. A pulse of black energy erupted from the heart of the Shard's core, sending shockwaves through the ship. Lawson's teeth clenched as he fought to stay on his feet. The Shard's power was collapsing. "No, no." The voice of the Shard leader howled in the back of their minds, a sound that reverberated through every inch of the ship. "You cannot break what has been forged. We are eternal." But it was too late. The AI, now fully synced with the Shard's energy matrix, began to unravel their control over the space around them. The Shard's connection to the very fabric of reality was slipping. The Perseverance was caught in the chaos, the entire ship groaning under the weight of the forces at play. "Captain, we need to get out of here," Kane said, her voice tight with urgency. "The ship can't hold much longer." Lawson barely heard her. His mind was focused entirely on the battle. The Shard had ruled this space for eons, manipulating reality, shaping the universe as they saw fit, but they had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt. The AI wasn't just countering the Shard's power, it was slowly draining it, destabilizing their entire network. "Strauss," Lawson said through gritted teeth, "how long until the Shard's control completely collapses?" 5 minutes, maybe less, Strauss replied, her fingers flying over the console. "But Captain, the Perseverance can't withstand much more of this. We have to escape before the whole thing implodes." Lawson nodded, a fierce determination flashing in his eyes. He looked at Kane, who was already working the helm, her eyes fixed on the flashing warning lights around the ship. "Get us out of here, Lieutenant," Lawson ordered. "Now." Kane didn't hesitate. She slammed her hands onto the console, inputting a series of commands as the Perseverance shuddered violently. The entire ship seemed to scream in protest, but Kane's voice was steady. "I'm punching in an emergency jump," she said. "Hold on." A series of loud beeps filled the bridge as the jump coordinates locked into the system. The ship's engines roared to life, their power nearly overwhelming as the Perseverance attempted to break free of the shard's collapsing grasp. But just as Kane initiated the jump, the ship lurched one final time, throwing everyone off balance. For a moment, it seemed like the ship was going to tear apart. The walls groaned and twisted, reality itself stretching like a rubber band on the verge of snapping. Lawson felt a sharp pain in his chest as the pressure increased, and for an instant, he thought they were done for. That this was the end. That the shard's centuries of power had finally won. But then, nothing. The pressure vanished in an instant, and the familiar hum of the ship's engines returned. The distortion around them, the oppressive energy, was gone. For a moment, everything was silent. The only sound was the shallow breathing of the crew, each of them holding their breath, unsure if the nightmare had truly ended. "We're free?" Kane asked, her voice soft and cautious. Lawson stood up, his legs shaky but still strong. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his gaze fixed on the now calm starfield outside the viewports. The shard were no longer there, no longer pressing on them, no longer warping space. For the first time in what felt like forever, the stars were still. "We did it," Strauss breathed, disbelief in her voice. "We actually did it." But Lawson didn't feel victorious. Not yet. He had no doubt the shard had been shattered, but something in him told him that this was only a temporary victory. They had fought a force that spanned galaxies, that manipulated space itself. What they had done was a miracle, yes, but it was also a warning. The shard were not gone. They had only been scattered. And in the end, Lawson knew, humanity had only won the first battle. The war was far from over. "Stay sharp," he said quietly, his voice hardening with resolve. "We've won today, but the real fight is still ahead of us." He turned to face his crew, all of them still processing the gravity of what had just happened. "We've broken the bond, the oldest chain in the galaxy. But now we're the ones being hunted." And with that, the Perseverance drifted quietly through the stars, as the galaxy washed, unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon them all. The silence that hung in the air aboard the Perseverance was unnerving. After the harrowing escape from the shard's collapsing grasp, the crew had retreated to their stations, each of them trying to process the sheer enormity of what had just happened. The stars outside were serene, calm, but the weight of their victory, or what they hoped was a victory, still pressed down on them. Captain Lawson stood at the front of the bridge, staring out at the empty vastness. The galaxy sprawled before them, vast and uncaring. For the first time since the attack on Earth, he felt a pang of uncertainty. The shard were far from defeated. Their core had collapsed, their influence broken, but the damage they had wrought was only beginning to reveal itself. "Captain," Strauss called from behind him. He turned to face her, seeing the lines of fatigue drawn deep into her face. "I've been analyzing the data from the AI. The shard's hold on this region is fractured, but we've only destroyed the physical nexus of their power. Their true strength, their influence over the fabric of reality, may still be intact." "What are you saying?" Lawson asked, his voice flat. "The shard are ancient. We've broken their stronghold here, but that doesn't mean they're gone. Their true domain isn't just one planet, one space. It's interwoven into the very structure of the galaxy. We might have won this battle, but the war is far from over." Lawson's gaze hardened. He knew she was right. The shard weren't a traditional enemy. They weren't bound by the same rules that governed human technology and tactics. They were more like a shadow in the fabric of existence, a presence that could never truly be erased. The AI had done what no one thought possible. It had crippled them here, But the deeper, more terrifying truth was that they might never fully be rid of the shard. "Then what's our next move?" Kane asked, her voice cutting through the silence. She was standing at the helm, her hands poised over the controls, her posture stiff with resolve. "We need to get to Earth," Lawson replied without hesitation. "We've bought ourselves some time, but we don't know how long. We need to prepare for the inevitable counterattack. Whatever the Shard have planned next, it's going to be worse than anything we faced." "The station on Earth is still operational," Strauss added, her tone urgent. "We can start rebuilding our defenses, develop new technologies to combat them. The resources on Earth will be crucial, but we need to get there before the Shard regroup." Lawson nodded. "Get us there, Kane. Full speed." Kane's fingers danced over the controls, and the Perseverance surged forward, its engines roaring to life. The stars ahead seemed to stretch as the ship entered into faster-than-light travel. But Lawson couldn't shake the feeling of unease gnawing at him. Earth had been their sanctuary, their last hope. But it was also the one place the Shard would focus their attention now. "Captain," Strauss said, her voice breaking through his thoughts, "I've detected something on the edge of our sensors. It's faint, but there's a signal. It's coming from somewhere in the outer rim." Lawson frowned. The outer rim was a desolate stretch of space, far beyond any known colony. It was the last place anyone would expect to find any activity, let alone a signal. "Can you identify it?" Lawson asked, his mind already racing. "It's encrypted," Strauss replied, fingers flying over the console as she worked to decode it. "But it's a human transmission, one I haven't seen before. It's not a standard military signal. It's different, almost like a distress call." "A distress call," Lawson repeated, his heart rate quickening. "From where?" "Unknown," Strauss said. "But it's coming from a sector that used to be under Shard control. The transmission's weak, but if we push the systems, we might be able to trace it." Kane looked up from the helm, her eyes locking with Lawson's. "You think it's a trap?" "I don't know," Lawson replied, his mind torn between the immediate threat to Earth and this unexpected signal. "But if it's human, we can't ignore it. It might be someone who knows something we don't. Someone who has answers. We can't afford to pass up any lead right now." "Captain," Strauss interjected, "the signal is coming from a location close to the remains of a former Shard stronghold. It could be someone trying to escape, or it could be something far more dangerous." "We'll take the risk," Lawson decided, his voice resolute. "Plot a course for the signal source, Kane. We'll see who, or what, is out there." The Perseverance adjusted its trajectory, the engines groaning in protest as they recalibrated. The crew was tense, each of them fully aware of the uncertainty ahead. The Shard were still out there, and the universe seemed to be spiraling toward an unknown conflict. But Lawson knew one thing for sure: they were not alone. As the ship sped toward the outer rim, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever awaited them would change the course of the war and the fate of humanity forever. The Perseverance pushed deeper into the outer rim, where the stars seemed distant and cold. The ship's engines hummed steadily as it cut through the dark expanse, heading toward the source of the mysterious distress signal. Lawson stood at the front of the bridge, his gaze fixed on the view screen, his mind racing. The signal was still faint, barely perceptible, but it was undeniably human. It was their only lead, their only hope in this seemingly endless war. "The signal's getting stronger," Strauss said, her fingers flying over the console. "We're almost there. The location is just ahead." Kane, her expression set and determined, glanced at Lawson. "You still think this is a trap, Captain?" "I don't know," Lawson replied, his tone grave. "But we can't afford to ignore it. Whoever, or whatever, is sending this signal, they might have information that could turn the tide in our favor. It's a risk, yes, but it's a risk we have to take." The tension on the bridge was palpable. Every crew member knew the gravity of the situation. They had survived the Shard's collapse, but they were not safe. The war was still raging, and now they were about to investigate an unknown distress signal, far from their home, in a region of space fraught with danger. The shard may have faltered, but something else was out there, something that could shift the balance of the entire conflict. As the Perseverance neared the source of the signal, the stars ahead of them suddenly flickered, revealing the remnants of a destroyed planet. Its surface was scarred, craters marking the once thriving world now reduced to nothing more than an uninhabitable husk. The remains of a shattered city could be seen on the surface, dark and twisted. "We're here," Strauss said quietly. "The signal is originating from the surface." "Any signs of life?" Lawson asked, narrowing his eyes. "I can't say for sure," Strauss replied, her voice tense. "The atmosphere is unstable, and there's a massive interference field preventing a full scan. But the signal, whatever it is, it's still broadcasting from down there." Kane adjusted the controls, and the Perseverance began its descent toward the planet's surface, moving carefully through the debris field. The planet's gravity pulled at them, but the ship's thrusters compensated, ensuring a smooth approach. Outside, the wreckage of shattered structures and scattered debris painted a grim picture. It was a place of death, yet the signal remained, a thread of hope in the middle of destruction. "Prepare for landing," Lawson ordered. "We're going in." The landing was rough, but the Perseverance settled down onto the barren surface with a thud. The crew quickly suited up, and Lawson gathered them together before they disembarked. The atmosphere outside was thin and toxic, but their suits would protect them. As they made their way to the airlock, Lawson couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. What were they walking into? A trap? A survivor? An ally? Or something far more dangerous? The hatch opened with a hiss, revealing the wasteland outside. The ground was cracked, littered with the remains of old technology, remnants of a civilization destroyed. The sky was a sickly orange, a byproduct of the planet's dying atmosphere. "This place, it's like the shard's aftermath," Kane muttered, her eyes scanning the horizon. "But this doesn't feel like one of their strongholds." "It isn't," Lawson replied. "But something or someone must have been here, sending out that signal." They moved cautiously through the debris, the eerie silence pressing in on them. The only sound was the soft crunch of their boots against the cracked ground. As they approached a half-collapsed structure, they saw a flicker of light in the distance, a faint glow, like a beacon. Without a word, they pressed forward, their footsteps quickening. The light grew brighter, and they soon found themselves in front of a massive ruined building. There, amidst the ruins, stood a single figure, cloaked in tattered clothing. The figure was tall and gaunt, its face hidden in shadow. "Who are you?" Lawson called, his voice firm but cautious. The figure didn't move at first. Then, slowly, it turned. Its face was pale, almost ethereal, and its eyes, those eyes, were unlike anything Lawson had ever seen. They glowed faintly with a strange light, not human, but not entirely alien either. "You shouldn't have come," the figure said, its voice rasping as if it had not spoken in years. "We received your distress signal," Lawson said, stepping closer. "We're here to help." The figure studied them for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Help, perhaps, but the Shard are not the only threat you face. They were only the beginning." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Lawson's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" The figure stepped forward, and for the first time, Lawson noticed the strange symbols etched into its skin. "You've broken the chain, Captain, but that only means the true war is about to begin. You've drawn the attention of something far older, far more dangerous than the Shard." A chill ran down Lawson's spine. "And what is it?" he demanded. The figure's eyes glowed brighter, and its lips curled into a faint smile. "The Forgotten Ones." And just like that, the galaxy's darkest secret was revealed. The Perseverance had unwittingly stumbled into the next chapter of a war that stretched beyond the stars, into the very fabric of time itself.